All right, so this is a continuation of part two of my story and testimony of how I gave my life to Christ. I left off at the part where my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. It did affect my life, but I definitely didn't understand how it was affecting my life at that age, around 8. Between the ages of 8 and 10. I was actually more concerned with what 8-year-old girls are concerned with. And also, I began to feel the absence of my dad. Now, it wasn't the first time I felt that, it was just the most significant time during my childhood that I remember feeling that while I was young. I began to have these spells to where I would just start crying at night, um, right at bedtime. This is back in the day when kids had a bedtime. Um, but I would literally cry myself to sleep every night. It was an entire phase. And my mother would ask what's wrong. I was very much so the child that would keep things to herself. That's another story for another day. But I would tell her, like, I miss my dad or something like that. And this is around age 8, 9, maybe 8 or 9. And she would call him at night and he would answer the phone and I would turn on my acting skills. I think this is how I learned how to act. It was like nothing ever happened. I wasn't crying. I would just suck it all in and that was it. He just never knew about this. And that continued for a while. My mom, of course, there was nothing she could really do about it. It wasn't like I was trying to like talk it out or anything like that. Um and she was also at the same time dealing with things of her own, being recently diagnosed. So there was just a lot happening at that time. A lot that I do believe I don't remember. Um I only remember how that time made me feel. So fast forward to around age maybe 10, I start to get really interested in boys. There was a boy, like, I think in the fifth grade, um, that I really liked. And I, that was the first time I had ever kissed a boy. Got really, really into boys. And somehow this situation with this boy had came home. I think a teacher had told my mother that I had kissed him on the playground. I think that's what happened. And my mom asked me about it, and I lied about it over and over and over again. That is when I learned how to not be a liar. I learned how to not be a liar after that. I got in so much trouble, not for kissing a boy, mostly for lying, for sure, because I lied to her over and over and over again for that. After that, I learned that lying is pointless. I think that's what made me who I am today when it comes to lying. So that was around the time I got into boys, and I want to say this was also closer to the time to where we would be moving to Houston. So we're in Arlington, Texas, and we've got maybe a year left. And one day, my mother tells me that she felt God told her to move to Houston. That's all that me as a 10-year old remembered, and so we did. That's all I knew at that age, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it at all. I Like I said, I had been called, but I was going to church, but at that age I still didn't know God. I still didn't know God. However, God's hand was all throughout my life. Come to find out later, that was not too long after my mom's diagnosis. She ended up having to go part-time and money was getting really tight. I didn't even know that she was getting help from other places and everything. So God knows what would have happened to us if she hadn't moved. But God told her to move to Houston. So we did. And I think this is around the time she's new to Christianity. She has a new relationship with God. It's fresh. So right before her diagnosis, actually, she gave her life up to Christ. Right before, and she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis shortly after. Now we get to Houston. I am 10 years old. I remember having my 11th birthday in Houston. And I want to give you background of who I was as a child prior to Houston. AB honor roll student. I was the child that would dang near cry if I got anywhere close to a C. Like I had to be first. I had to be first chair because I was in the orchestra. I played the viola. Like I had to be the best first chair. If you don't know, means that you are the best in that section. So if you play the viola, you're the best viola player. If you play the cello, you're the best cello player. I always wanted to be first. I was very competitive. I think I got that naturally from my father's side. Um, but I also just I've always had drive. I was definitely born with that. So, um I wanted to have the best grades in class. We got little awards for that. So I remember all of these things. Loved school, loved reading. My mom used to make me read books every day. I had to read my atlas for 30 minutes a day, and I had to read for another 30 minutes to an hour any book that I would like, but I would just read like hours on end. I loved to read. I did read the atlas, so thank the Lord my mom made me read that because I've met too many adults that don't even know where Germany is. that's not that's not a bass. I really just can't believe it. But that's who I was as a child. That's academically. Now, I told you I grew up around nothing but white people, so I was considered what they call an Oreo. Apparently, an Oreo is someone who grew up around white people, so they're not as cultured in the black culture. So when I would go around family members, like cousins and things like that of my age, they would say, "Oh, why do you talk white?" I would get called white girl. Um, Talking white because I was speaking properly. And so that's what I would get teased for as a kid. That was me. Now, as far as personality, I was the bubbly. I would say I definitely gave life to my immediate family. Um, my immediate family being my grandmother, my grandparents, my immediate cousins, and my aunts and my mother. I was definitely the bubbly, very silly kid, very very outgoing, just as much of a kid as I could be. I think I did grow up a little fast when it came to the area of what I had seen. But because of that, and because of who God created me to be, I think He created me to be exactly what my mom was going to need during the younger days in my life. I was not the child that would go into a candy store with their parent or go into a store with their parent and ask for candy because somehow at a very young age I was able to piece together that we didn't have it. So I wasn't going to ask. That was me as a kid. Um yeah, that's who I was. Fast forward to Houston. All of that is out of the window. Whoever I was as whoever Cherie was pre Houston was not Cherie once we got there. I became a child who was very confused about why we were in Houston, why we moved there. I did not understand the words God told me to. That just wasn't enough for me as a child. When I got there, we moved in with my godparents, and so it was my godparents and my mom. Uh, of course, we had my god sister too, but she was a baby. So they did notice that I struggled with the transition, and I was definitely pushed to get out and meet people immediately. I was in a box. I did not want to meet anyone. I didn't want to even be there. I wanted to go back to Dallas with my friends, typical child things, but also just very confused. And as an adult today who has also gone through therapy, so I know things that I didn't know back then, I was just I was relating that to another time in my life when I was younger, to where there was a big move and I didn't understand it, and then life was just different and there was no explanation for it. There was no nothing. Like, boom, life is different. Like, this is just how it has to be. And so I had to adjust to that, but at the same time I was because I was a child who was trying to adjust to a move and adults around me saw that, I was pushed to go and meet people or go make friends or go do this or go to these kid groups and even like the Boys and Girls Club. And it was just a lot for me. It was not what I needed. It was um, a very confusing time in my life. And so it resulted in me shutting down. I became a whole new kid. And not only was I confused about the move, I was also in a culture shock. So remember, I was around nothing but white people. We moved to the south side of Houston, not just Missouri City, but Mo City to be exact. For those of you who don't know what that means, there is Missouri City, Houston, which is right next to Sugarland. And then there's an area that we call Mo City, and that is an all black and Hispanic area. It's it's connected to that Missouri City part, but it's another side of it that's closer to Houston or either in also includes Houston. So it's in between Pearland and Missouri City, and it is historically the opposite of what I grew up in. There was just way too many changes and I didn't understand how to handle it. So all of the qualities that I just listed before were gone in the blink of an eye. And I had a really hard time with that. So I had my 11th birthday, um, and fast forward to, I want to say, ninth grade. We get to ninth grade. I am 14 at this point. Now remember, the devil came in at 7 when God came in. He saw God came in, and the devil came in too. Um, and so during that time, I started to explore. I was exploring myself. Um, the boys were still in the picture and everything. That was always constant for me, but and that was a thing at that time too at 14, but if anything, I was exploring whatever was inside of me. And the way that I was living at that age, which I think a lot of kids that age um live in this way who have gone through struggles, I was just riding the wave. I didn't understand what was happening to me. I was just going along with it. Like, I didn't understand why I was where I was mentally. I didn't even know where I was mentally. I just knew I wanted to continue in it. And by that I mean I had gotten to the point to where I legit told my mom I just like to do bad things. I remember her asking me something about why I had started to act out in school. And I said something along the lines of, I just enjoy doing bad things. It's fun. That's what I told her. And so looking back at that, I know for sure that the devil had a hold on me. Also around that time, it was ninth grade. I'm 14 years old and new to high school, new fresh environment, and boys was definitely a thing. But most importantly, I had revisited the absence of my father. And this is when things started to get really shaky. As a child, things happen to you in life and you don't connect the dots and realize, like, oh, I started this because of that. Looking back, I know that I started to engage in certain activities because things were happening with my dad. Now, my entire life, it was always the type of setup to where um, dad calls, he says he's going to come, and then he doesn't show up. So that happened again when I was 14. I think it was a spring break. I remember this so significantly because for some reason that time it hurt me big time. And I don't know why, because it happened too often in my life. But for some reason, I guess I really thought I was getting picked up that spring break around the age of 14, I want to say. And he didn't come. And that entire spring break I spent in bed. And that was the first time I experienced depression. That was the first time I experienced depression. I literally remember only being in bed. I didn't do anything else. I was crying up a storm. As far as my mom, I remember her trying to talk to me, and I just didn't want to talk to her. I remember her getting upset because I didn't want to talk to her, but there were reasons that I wasn't talking to her that I figured out later in therapy. Not entirely relevant to this testimony, but I'll revisit that another time. So, depression had set in at 14. And as you can see, the devil is basically putting his little markers in my life. So, we've got the sexuality at a very young age. We have depression at 14. Anxiety set in at 16, or at 15 actually. Anxiety set in at 15. Drugs started at 15. Um, I mean, once that high school career started, it was it was pretty much everything you had seen on Euphoria in a lighter sense, because that show is deep. Um, it was everything you have seen on Zendaya's show Euphoria. If you want a good picture of what my high school life was like, a typical high school kid with struggles. I definitely was trying to numb pain a lot in high school. I was trying to connect the dots in ways that were not the best ways. And I had attached myself once I reached 15 to a particular person that ended up having a huge impact on my life for a certain amount of years. So we get to 15. I actually switched schools at this point because I was acting out so much at my other high school in the ninth grade. Now, mind you, remember I said I was in orchestra. Well, I stayed in orchestra from fourth grade to the ninth grade. And it used to be something that I really loved. And then I just stopped caring about it. And my mom was driving me from Mo City to Missouri City. That is why I gave you that geographical information. It's about a 15-minute drive. I wasn't zoned to that school, but I was able to go to that school. Okay. So she was driving me to that school in order to um, get, in order to put me in a program that at the time I thought I wanted to continue to be in, which was orchestra. Once I started acting out, she was like, "Nope, you going to this school that is right here next to our house." And that is when I got into the relationship. It was the first significant relationship in my life. And I was about 14 years old. I had attached myself to this person. Now, I want to say, watch out if you notice that your child is really into dating at a young age. And yes, 15 is a young age to be hyper focused on dating. It is. I'm sorry, it is. If you notice that, just take precaution. Like, make sure that your child is able to come to you and tell you everything, because you're going to need to know. I took it upon myself to get super attached to somebody. I actually, to this day, don't remember how that happened. But I will say that it was a continued hand of the enemy. He continued to try his best to take the wheel in my life. And once I attached myself to this person at 15, it did become your typical high school relationship. And I say that because it wasn't fully a relationship. So this person ended up becoming somebody who took advantage of me in a lot of ways. Um, they saw that, one, my mom had put me through a ceremony in church. We're still going to church at this time. So once we started going to church at 8, we continued. Um, my mom put me through a ceremony at church that was a declaration to God that I was going to keep my virginity. Very great ceremony, by the way. I think we should still have these. So they put a ring on your finger and you walked around with that ring. So if you're 15 walking around in high school with this ring on your ring finger in the States, because that's what we do on that left hand, people are going to notice it. And it became a game to people. And one of those people was the person that I ended up in a relationship with. And so I use the word relationship very lightly because this person definitely took advantage of how naive I was at that age, how desperate for pretty much anything. I, I I know that I definitely was desperate for a certain type of love, but I think I was just desperate to feel something more than just a certain type of love. I just wanted to feel something. And so, although I was in church, of course, obviously I had not given my life to Christ, right? Because just a year ago, I loved to do bad things. Not much had changed except my location. And so, yes, I was still changing, but it wasn't for the best. I was changing because I was in a new high school, but I wasn't changing my character um, for the better. So I'm at a new high school. I'm also deciding, okay, I'm just gonna like run track because I don't know anybody here. And that helped me to meet people. But that relationship ended up being quite detrimental for me. This person was someone who decided that I was a game. And so it was more so, can you take her virginity? Let me, as a young boy, show my friends that I can do this. That person was also highly influenced by friends, very young and naive. I mean, we're both like 14, 15 at this point. So we're both naive, we're both young, but they were super interested in the opinion of their friends. And that that definitely spilled over into how that person interacted with me. And so um it was a lot of I'm going to be this person to you in your face, and I'm going to tell you all of these things. I'm going to tell you that I love you. I'm going to tell you all this and that, but then I'm going to pretend like I don't even know you when other people are around. And I let that continue until, geez, for the rest of high school. For the rest of high school, it was like that. And I do remember, I remember it being like a lot of confusion with that situation and my friends. There was lots of my friends at the time. There was a lot of spillage between that relationship and my friendships. There was a lot of fakeness going on, just things that you deal with as a child in high school sometimes. Um, but the devil used all of that in my life to try to take my purity. And it didn't happen until age 18. At this point, my birthday is in April. I'm on my way out of high school. And I am this close to making it, but I went ahead and gave that exact same person my virginity. And so when I look back, it's just little things like that, knowing how present God was in my life and how he was calling me and how he was with me at during all those times watching over me because he knew what was to come in the future. But what I'm looking back to my life today and just thinking about how the devil also was just driving. He had the wheel for sure. Like he thought he was winning by me giving up my purity. He thought he was winning by me um, starting drugs at the age of 15 and getting introduced to that and having friends around me who honestly were just not the best people to have around. The other thing that you need to make sure of when it comes to your children, Christian parents, is who your kids are around. I know that sounds like something that everyone knows, but it's very important. It's very important who those friends are. What is their character? What is their character? And start putting in your child's ear, you know, to pay attention to that. Teach them about how to navigate friendships. Because although these were friendships that I was in for quite some time, they were not the best. And those friendships impacted me too in ways that are just not what God intended for my life. And although God turned every single thing that I went through in life into good, for sure, he never intends for you to go down a certain road, of course. He wants the best for us. So, with that being said, there were friendships that I was in for a very long time that molded me into a person that God didn't necessarily want me to be. When you have hurt people around other hurt people, those hurt people, especially if they're the closest thing person to you, they're going to influence you to do things that God never intended for or intended to be in your path. Um so I did start drugs. I did start to see myself in a different light than what God had for me to see myself as, and everything in my life at that point had became a numbing agent. Everything was a numbing agent. I also remember body dysmorphia started around age 16. So once I started going through these terrible relationships, um, that main relationship that I spoke on was also one that was like verbally abusive. I got told that, now, mind you, at this age, at 14, I'm like a toothpick. I'm like a toothpick, but I want to say I vividly remember going through depression, starting to go through depression, and starting to see like other people around me. I'm around Black people now. Girls are thick. I wanted to be thicker, and not only be thicker, but I also was using food as a way to cope. I don't know what or where I got that from, but for some reason, I had at one point told myself, I'm just going to eat more. Like I started a binge eating disorder because one, I was depressed, and because I wanted to fit into my clothes better like the other girls around me. They say that when you are a teenager you're clinically insane, and honestly I believe it. So yes, that is when I start the body dysmorphia had began in my life. So now we've got drugs, we've got um all of this, these things that have to do with sexuality or fornication. We've got body dysmorphia, depression. The devil was just adding on things little by little. So the sweet little silly, goofy, fun, loving, kind, sweet girl had become this, had become this. I had gotten to a point to where I was a very, very careless child. When my mom started seeing me go through these things, of course, you see the change. I remember she definitely reached out to the community for help, and by community, I mean like family members, everyone, because she was a single parent doing this all on her own. She was doing a heck of a good job, but she had to reach out to other people, and I vividly remember these phone calls. They were calling me and asking me like, is everything okay? Your mom told me this, like what's going on, because I wasn't talking to her. And so I would just say whatever I had to say to get off the phone with them. Basically, I knew at a very young age, I always knew what to say um to please a person. I knew what to say that was going to get me the result that I wanted, which is another thing that came in at a young age, which was manipulation. Um, in the midst of me dealing with those demons, manipulation was for sure one of them. I I remember that I no longer had the whole lying issue. Like I said, ever since I was um 10 and I had that incident in the 5th grade. I didn't have to lie. I just remember I really just didn't care. I didn't care. So the lying wasn't an issue for me. It was more so manipulation. I was really good at manipulating. I had also learned how to pretend to be something that I'm not on in during those nights where I was crying for my father, and then I would get on the phone and then suck it all up and it'd just be gone. And I'd pretend like everything is okay. I changed my voice, I changed my attitude, everything. So he couldn't hear it over the phone. So I had learned how to, basically acting, but I had learned how to manipulate people to get whatever it was that I wanted out of them at that time. So all of these demonic spirits were on me at a young age. This is age 15. Go talk to your teenagers, please. Um, fast forwarding to age 18, I told you that is when the purity, that was the one of the last things that was lost in my teenage years. And I did continue that relationship into college, and it didn't officially end. And by continue, I mean on and off. So this is like maybe 6 or 7 years on and off. And it didn't officially end until I was about 20 years old. And I hopped out of that, hopped right back into another one that was quite toxic. And that will be in part